Who knows how this is going to start? I don't know.
Yeah, hi, and welcome to.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Catching Up with Web Performance, a podcast about stories of people and web performance. Today, my very special guest is none other than Annie Sullivan. Annie, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Thanks. I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, trying not to be nervous, talking to a celebrity and all. I've got to ask, do you feel like a celebrity? Like now that you've done all these podcasts and you come up on Google I/O Summit and stuff, like, is it?
I
don't know.
don't really none of my neighbors are in tech, so nobody in my area knows who I am. And every once in a while, my 8-year-old is like, "Mommy, are you famous?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not famous." And he's like, "I think you're famous."
Tell him, yeah, he knows. You tell him the truth. You're famous. Annie Sullivan of Core Web Vitals fame. We have so many things to talk about, but I want to just it's stories. All around here is just let's chat. I want to hear about you. So how did you get into web performance or just even web? What's your first web performance memory?
Yeah, so the first website I worked on when I was in college, and high school, I was really, really into punk rock, and so I made a website for a local record label and a forum for the local hardcore scene, and so that was really my biggest first experience making a production website and having people look at it and things like that. And the first web performance experience I had actually started as a quality issue. Their forum was World Wide Web Board. It was this Perl script from the 90s. It was 1998-ish. Yeah. And so I don't if your forum has a lot of controversy and people are posting a lot and they're yelling at each other, World Wide Web Board has this problem with concurrency where the way that it decides what is the ID for the next post. It reads a file, it pulls the next post ID out, then it writes the post into number.txt, and then it increments the number and it writes it back out to the text file. And then you can imagine user A and user B have concurrent requests and they both get the same ID and they overwrite each other's posts. And
oh God,
everybody got really mad about this. So I tried to understand what would be the right way to write a message board. And I did a bunch of research and it seemed like using a database for the messages would probably be better because it handled concurrency. So I rewrote the thing. Instead of to generate all the files out, I rewrote it as a script that would query the database and then add the next post to the database and then automatically generate the listing and the post. But it was 1998 and this was very slow because it was all dynamic.
Right. Well, and two, I'm so curious, how did you do? I'm picturing Annie in the library at college. How did you research this? Because this 1998, that's pre-Google, right?
Yeah. So how did I figure? The way that I learned about stuff was it was a long time ago. It is it's hard to emphasize how much it was a long time ago. So I really wanted to write not just a web page in HTML, but a dynamic web page. And the first way that I found out about this was I don't remember the name of the guy, jmarshall.com. He had this website called and it had one CGI made really, really easy and one HTTP made really, really easy. And it talked about how these things work, not how do you use some technology to do it. So he's basically, the user send a request and it has headers and then it has, post form fields. And then you run a program and you generate a response that has headers and HTML. I'm great. Okay, so it's 1998 and I'm in college and I'm all I will write a C program. and that's what I did. I wrote a guest book in C. And so I was, a little bit frustrated though, because C programs, they crash a lot. They're just a little bit, I didn't really understand the security implications of writing a very simple guest book in C, but it just was very clunky, right? There weren't very good string libraries and things like that. And so I had this internship. And this was just weird in itself. The internship was at a local company, and one of the engineers had written a bunch of tests in Bash. And for readability reasons, and this is hilarious, he wanted me to convert them to Perl.
Of course. Why not?
Yeah, because it's 90s, right? Anything goes. And so I read a Perl in a Nutshell, the O'Reilly book. I read about regular expressions. I learned Perl and I was oh, okay. So it makes more sense as why people are learning Perl is this web stuff. They want to do scripting in Perl. And the way that it handled strings, I'm oh, right, this will be way easier than C++.
Yeah.
And so I started reading about, like how to make websites in Perl. And that's where I came up with the like people use databases. I took a class in databases in college. So anyway, I'm working on this. So originally I'd taken World Wide Web Board and then learned more Perl, learning out how it works. And then I think at that point I had heard about this new thing called PHP. And so I used PHP and MySQL to make my new forum. And the problem was that, like, because I dynamically generated the form from the database every time, it was pretty slow. And I tried like switching back and forth between like the tree of messages. Should that be recursive or should that be, like should I come up with an iterative method? It didn't make a difference in timing.
Right.
What made a difference was like shortening the number of messages per page. And then more than anything else, caching. I think that, like that's pretty common knowledge now that you don't want to dynamically generate something every time if you can. And there's lots of different layers of caching, right? You can cache on the client, you can cache on the server, etc. So that was my very first experience with web performance. And you can see this in the 90s because like there wasn't anything happening on the front end, right? Like everything was on the back end and it was just about optimizing the server, which
is nothing to speak of just like the network, right? Like trying to deal with, because what is it? We had AOL. I don't know what where you were.
Yeah.
What were the connection speeds like? What was it 56 kilobits?
I got onto university Ethernet, so it was a little bit faster, but a lot of people were on AOL. And yeah, but I mean that was another thing with shortening the HTML, and just we just didn't have images and things like that because it just wasn't like feasible back then.
Right.
So, yeah, so that was my first experience with web performance, and I finished college and I took graphics and artificial intelligence and a lot of really interesting classes. And when I graduated, I decided to go make video games. So I spent the next 5 years, I did AI and gameplay programming at two small game studios.
Yeah.
And so totally different from the web, not even connected to the internet. Back in those days, it was PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox. And you would write a game and it would ship on DVD and that would be done forever. Like whatever bits were on that DVD, like they're shipped.
Which that's already such a novel, like or going back to that and going, wait a minute, you'd be done? I couldn't just fix it?
Yeah. It was, I don't know. Like on the one hand, the crunch times were so intense and the level of testing was so insane, right? Like Sony did this thing called the technical requirements checklist, and it's like 85 pages that your QA team had to go through and verify everything worked. And one of them was that the game had to run for 8 hours. And it's I will remind you, on 32 megabytes of memory, there is no more memory, and you just have to go forever. And so that like changed like the way we did data structures, right? Like all of the data structure design was basically like you literally like read the bytes off of the disk, and where on the disk are the bytes, right? They're all in order and they're on the outside because it spins faster. Like it's very, very performance focused work, but very low level. I mean, AI is higher level, obviously, than the graphics layer, but we're still like using our data structures and algorithms and thinking about like where is the memory and
I mean, just the level of detail that you've described in those few short sentences. I feel like, and I don't know, maybe I'm projecting here, but I feel like that puts you in such a better position, or I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to get at is like when you have performance is so much about that level of detail. To truly improve things, you have to get really down to the nuts and bolts of it. Like there's some easy wins, sure. But when you really want to make something better, you have to fully understand how it works and almost get
you have to really think about how it all works, right? Like I think with web pages, when I started to go back and work on the browser and look at, how our network requests going through, how does the parser work? Like thinking about how does the browser see this web page is really, really different than you as a developer when you're writing the web page. There's like a lot of layers of abstraction between them, and trying to figure out like what's important and understand, like, are you making a blocking network request? All those back of the napkin calculations, right? Like a network request takes this much time, a disk read takes that much time. Knowing those things and how they relate to web programming can be really complicated because there's a lot of layers of abstraction. At one point I was speaking, I think it was a Performance Now with Pat Meenan, and he said, like, people keep asking me how I do this. And he said, be curious. Like, just try and understand what's happening. And I think it's really, really good advice for learning about these things.
So speaking of being curious, let's go back here. You graduate college. You've been experiencing the web through making some hardcore community websites or made it for the record label. dealing with concurrency, switching out a file-based system to a database. And then you go into games. And now it's like totally different. The level of testing is wild because there's no going back. Once this hits the DVD, like that's it. And it's entirely performance. Like I need the game to run smoothly. People need to be able to play. Not only that, but we need to be able to play this for 8 hours straight. I'm picturing like, you know, when you go and drop your car off at the mechanic and you want to do performance testing on a car, you just put it up on the ramp and you let the wheels spin at 60 miles an hour. So I'm picturing you guys doing that with a game where you just like set up the game, play, and let it run for. Did you actually let the game run for 8 hours, or how did you guys test that?
I mean, yeah, sometimes we have the game running for 8 hours, but like so game programming, I may be making it sound more formal or mature than it is. Like we literally like we're working 80 hours a week, and you have 2 test crews, and each one works 12-hour days, 7 days a week, and so they're like literally playing the game overnight. Like you finish a build and they'll play all night. And they'll do, you know, like bring you bugs. And
a person is playing the game the whole time.
Yes. And they're doing crazy stuff, right? Like, let's see if we can you jump through the floor? At any point in this level, can you jump through the floor? Like, it sounds like a fun job, but video game testing is really painful.
Yeah. And strenuous just to like go through for that long and just see if you can keep breaking it. That's wild.
Yeah, but I did want to point out it wasn't all performance or things like that. I mean, a lot of it was just really, really, really fun, right? Like taking the designers and the animators and their ideas and their use cases and bringing it into reality. I wrote a visual scripting system so that like the level designers could, without knowing any programming, like make their own levels. I have a video on my LinkedIn that a high school kid and an artist made together with no programming experience. And they made this level. It had rising and lowering water levels. And the game didn't have a concept of water. They made up the concept of water. They made switches that turned the water on and turned it off. And like the level is just super duper cool. It goes up and down. And like we were able to all kind of work together and like figure out how to make that happen. And that was what I really loved about game programming.
That's fantastic.
I'm mostly focused on AI.
Yeah.
I've written a bunch of pathfinding systems, but like just sitting with the animators and like bringing a character to life. That's kind of like the why, right? Like why does it have to be performant so that we can like kind of take these ideas and make them alive.
Are you still doing any video game? Yeah, I was going to say, are you doing any video games on the side?
I'm so burnt out. It's been 17, almost 18 years since I left the video game industry, and I am still burnt out.
Oh my God.
It's insane. Like, have you ever like really worked 100-hour a week? It's a lot.
I have not. I'm too, I've been blessed with a very easy life. I'm very privileged. I haven't had to really fight for anything. 100 hours a week? No, that's crazy.
It's a lot. I mean, like I learned so much and did so much cool stuff, but I'm still tired when I think about it. So.
But there are fun memories to look back on and be like, you know, that was a lot. I missed that. That was a good time.
Yeah.
Man. So when did you exit the game and what happened next? Like, did you go straight from gaming to core web vitals, or like what was in between here?
Yeah, so about 2005, I was getting really, really tired of working in the game industry and like pulling these crazy all-nighters all the time and just not seeing a lot of career growth for what I personally really love to do. I think that there's more, at least at the time, there's a lot more trajectory for engine programmers than the people that are on the gameplay side. I don't have any idea if that's still true, but anyway, I was starting to think about other jobs, and I got contacted by a Google recruiter and somehow managed to make it through the interview. And I showed up on the first day and I had no idea, like, what are they going to put me in? Because it's 2005, Google didn't have anything really close to video game, especially like video game AI. Right. They ask so there's this new browser called Firefox, and we have this Google toolbar. Might I be interested in making a Google toolbar for Firefox? And they sit me down, and I'm in like the Cube area with like Ben Goodger and Darren Fisher and Brian Reiner and like the folks from Mozilla, and they're like working on new browser ideas. At the same time as we're making this Google toolbar for Firefox, and we're like trying to make it a Google toolbar. They're also like prototyping new browser features. The anti-phishing feature was prototyped through Google toolbar for Firefox. We did some early prototyping on protocol handling. Mm-hmm. So for like Google Docs, right? Like if you click on a document, open it in Google Docs and things like that.
Yeah.
So it was really, really fun to do that work on the toolbar and learn about browsers. Like I couldn't get some some Zool to work. And I asked Ben Goodger, like, what do I do? And he like shows me how to use the DOM inspector. So just kind of learning from people that were there. Or like one time a guy came by with a CSS question, and Ian Hickson also sat with us, just like opens up a whiteboard and explains like why are CSS selectors like this?
Yeah.
Which is really, really exciting, right? And interesting to learn about browsers like from first principles and see what was happening and all the things that people were thinking about.
Here's, are there any of the first principles that you might recall, or like any whiteboard highlights? Like, because I feel like that's a dramatic shift from game design, web, browser. What's going on here? How does this work? And then, okay, CSS selectors, why they work the way they work is one thing. Are there any other, like, I don't know, surprises, revelations of, whoa, this is how a browser works? And as you're first getting into it, do you recall any?
Oh, this one's a little awkward. Like the biggest surprise for me. All right, I'm going to tell the story. Okay, so the biggest surprise for me was, I don't know if you've ever looked at like how parsers used to work back then, but like Internet Explorer, why isn't it HTML, right? Mm-hmm. Why isn't it like properly formed? Why is Internet Explorer and Gecko and like WebKit, why are they all different? Like, how did they come to like some of the similarities and like how they handle like overlapping tags and things like that? And I was talking to him, he's like, yeah, so what happened was we were like really trying, when we worked at Netscape, we're really trying to have compatibility with Internet Explorer, and we would keep getting these bugs. My friend says he was looking at this site and it doesn't work in Netscape, and it was always a porn site. So like essentially like the web browser evolved to make sure that it was compatible on porn sites. We might want to cut this whole thing out.
Oh man, that's hilarious. That's like the stories of how we got Blu-rays, right?
Yeah, I mean a lot of the early internet, the technology, all of that. But I mean another thing I think that was really interesting is like what I was actually most surprised about was how much I just didn't get it, right? Like people will be talking about the need for new APIs and new features in JavaScript, and I just didn't kind of really get it. Like, why is everybody talking about bind and call and apply and how all that mess could be better? Like, as it's like somebody who's really like more focused on C type programming, I just kind of didn't get it.
Interesting. Was there ever a moment where you did get it?
So there's a couple things that happened. The smaller one was I used to, when I was doing interviews, so I would ask people, because it was only 2005 at the time, I would ask people, like, if you could go back to the early days of Netscape and Internet Explorer and the browser wars and you could change something about CSS and HTML, what would you change? And I asked it a bunch of times, and then there's this one guy, and he was like, well, obviously I would have made it a binary format, and I would have, and he had all of these performance changes that would make the web like way better. And he's like, and I'm really glad they didn't ask me because no one ever would have used it. I was just like, oh, that's really true, right? And that's true about things like PHP too, right? Like people use it because it's really easy to spin up and get used to. And like just realizing how much value there is to that, right? And seeing a little bit about why the world is the way it is. And the second thing that happened, which was a much bigger thing for me and my career direction, was as we were deciding, like, okay, we're going to make a browser, we're going to have Chrome, it's going to be this new thing. I was thinking a lot about this and how I just didn't understand. Like it seemed like the most important thing that Chrome team wanted to do was provide better APIs on the web. And I felt like I just didn't get it, like exactly why. And so at the same time that was happening, we acquired this little company called Rightly, and we were going to launch Google Docs. So I decided to actually like step away from the Chrome work and go work on Rightly and try to understand this web thing. Because I'd always wanted to have something exist like a document editor on the web.
Right.
So I joined Rightly and we launched on docs.google.com. I learned a ton about like security, performance, internationalization, accessibility, like everything you need to do to scale a website. And just all of the work that they were doing inside Google, like across the app suite, like I got to see kind of how the Clojure compiler came to be, why the Clojure library exists, how at the time we were building dynamic web applications, what the challenges were. And then I really started to understand, like, okay, yeah, the web API service is definitely, as of 2005, was not good enough.
Right. This is like once you're in the heat of trying to make this thing, like, here's, we want to make Google Docs.
Yeah.
I need these things to work better. And it feels like maybe there wasn't a particular moment, but that was the time when you said, I get it.
Yeah. It was just like a long journey of like trying to do one thing after the other and seeing how they all kind of intermingle, right? Like you want to make something accessible and then also has to be bi-directional UI and it has to like go back and forth, like for smaller and larger languages, right? The size of the UI has to go back and forth, and then you want to pre-render it on the server so that it's fast and minimize round trips. And you want like sprites on your images were a big thing back then.
Mhm.
How do we make rounded corners?
No. That's funny. So we went from college developing games, went into working on browsers, specifically making a toolbar at Google for Firefox. Somewhere along the way, let's make Chrome. And then roughly the same time or after around then, I'm going to join the Google Docs team because this looks like a fun project. Holy cow, we need better APIs because we need to do all these things and be able to support all these different things. What happens next? I mean, we have Google Docs. I know that was a success story, right?
I worked in Google Docs for a couple of years. I got to make like one of the first like really big offline applications with Google Gears and learned all about like the pros and cons of different API services for offline applications in particular. Mm-hmm. And then they had a Google-wide performance effort to try and make every single app perform better. And I got to lead that for Google Docs. So that was really, really interesting. I got to work with Steve Souders and I got to, learn about infrastructure across Google and help they input into like, well, how can we monitor and measure apps? What do we need in terms of infrastructure? Got to give first input on like the navigation timing API. Nice. But yeah, just mostly made Docs like a whole lot faster. We went from So we would measure like from the doc list to opening the doc, how long that took. And at the beginning, it was 6 seconds and we got it down to 2 seconds at I think at the 90th percentile for like end-to-end latency for real users in like 2008. So that was pretty cool and really fun. I learned a lot. I got to give like a little workshop at Velocity that year, or 2010. I got to give a workshop. And so that was all like really fun, right? And I think the most exciting thing about Google Docs though was actually seeing like the usage go up and up and up, right? Seeing classrooms start using it and kids start collaborating on their docs and getting to talk to teachers about how they're using it and things like that was really, really neat.
Are there any highlight stories that come to mind of like, this made such a difference in somebody's life?
I think it's just all of the little ones. Like, just my brother-in-law, he didn't know what I was working on. And I told him, and he's like, oh, I've had to travel for work. And I've been helping my son with his college applications on Google Docs. And we collaborate together. Like, all those little ones, right? Like, that you made all these little things possible. That was just really cool.
That's crazy. Just like, I mean, it's something like that, you think of what it would have been like before. Like, I'm going to help them with this college application. Oh, it's so much easier now because like we both can access a website and just jump in and do it together.
Yeah, and that's exactly like what I wanted to exist when I joined the project. So that was kind of neat.
So we're getting in here to Google Docs, and there's a performance initiative at Google, and y'all are coming up with metrics and ways to look at this. Like, you know what? How do we know that Google Docs is better? Well, how about we look at opening a document and the time from the list to the time the document's actually there. Let's measure that. We'll have some JavaScript in the background, or I don't actually know enough behind the scenes to how you collect the telemetry on that. But somewhere we're coming up with metrics and saying, how do we know this is actually better? Tracking real world usage, improving, seeing the percentiles come down and improve. And then what happens? Like you keep doing Google Docs forever, or like what comes after that?
I worked in Google Docs for about 3 years. And so like the version I worked on was the very first version that, came in with the Rightly acquisition, and they decided they were going to make a new version, the Kix editor, which is much better and more robust for a lot of reasons. But they decided to staff that in New York. And so at the time I was in Mountain View, and I had talked a lot to the team that worked on Google Search about front-end performance as we had this big company-wide initiative, and they were just doing some really, really, really cool stuff, right? They had, basically they would do a live experiment for every change that they were making, and they could quantify down to like 5 or fewer milliseconds, right? Like what was the end user impact of this change? And I was just really excited about that. So I went and joined Google Search, and it was a really good time to join because they were really trying to move from like 10 blue links to something more interactive and dynamic. And so I had a lot of knowledge about the infrastructure that already existed at Google and how it might be applied, like the Clojure compiler and, how the Clojure library was designed and what did and didn't work well with that, and how people are using templates, things like that.
You've been at Google, like, how long has it been? You've been at Google 17 years?
We're still back in 2010 at this point.
Right. Somewhere along, we've got a performance initiative. We've got Chrome. Here we are. There's the 2010s, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I worked a lot on like modernizing the search front end, right? Like, how should it serve
Mm-hmm.
JavaScript? How can it break JavaScript up? How can it deal with the fact that like maybe you have two different lazy loaded modules and they each want a calendar? Like, how do you load the calendar of two and only
Yeah.
once? Like trying to design module loading, trying to figure out better templating systems, and dealing with some really really interesting problems. Like you have an experiment framework with like 1,000 experiments that can be running at any one time. How do you serve code? How do you make it performant? How do you know if it's running? Because when I started on search, they were really focused obviously on like backend monitoring, right? Like, is a server doing, is it running out of memory? Are there 500s, et cetera, et cetera?
Mhm.
And like I showed the SREs, like, look, you can screw up your CSS and make a blank page. We need to monitor this, right? So like I would do stuff like review all the postmortems and look for commonalities in front end issues and try to, look through how would we mitigate those? How would we detect those types of things?
Feels like such a paradigm shift.
Yeah, but it was really fun, right? Because I got to learn so much from like how Google search does things that have like actual data scientists working on, like how do we decide if something's better or worse, and learn all about like how they were doing things. But also I was able to kind of bring some experience to them. And so it was just a really, really exciting time.
Yeah. You have so many different perspectives that you can pull from, right? So much experience here with, I've gone from just learning fundamentals of computer science, doing game design, optimizing backend applications, focusing on server, just looking at the browser itself, how it parses HTML, how it does its work, makes network requests. And then you're on the front end now too, looking at like, oh, by the way, CSS can kill your site. What? It feels like after going through all these things, there's another novel concept. Like that feels like, did it feel as different as it sounds, focusing more on this front end stuff?
I mean, it was a shift over years, right? And like
Right.
being able to really slowly move into it. I think, especially with Google Docs, right? Like eventually we have millions and millions of users, but at the beginning it was just early adopters and we would like hear things from them. Like, this doesn't work in Opera or whatever. And
Mhm.
like we could talk to them. And so you can learn like kind of slowly, right? Like
Right.
I make this mistake, it has this impact, and like actually see what's happening to users. And then by the time you get up to scale, you can think about over the course of years, like how might we detect this problem is happening.
Yeah. And then too, we've got experiments, the thousands. Like as soon as I heard that number, I went, whoa, running 1,000? Like in my day to day, I don't normally have to think of thousands of experiments. Like we're doing A/B split testing, right? Like here, I've got a couple of tests running. Maybe I've got a multi-arm bandit, but it's not that many arms, Curious how you do all of that. You've mentioned a couple things that you find interesting and exciting. Are there other things that you haven't mentioned yet that you like, that's really cool. I like doing this or solving these problems?
I'm just basically interested in like user problems, like how what are how are people using the software, right? And
Yeah.
like what is happening, how are the problems in their lives getting solved. I took like an interlude a few years ago and just took an entire summer at the US Digital Service, and I went to the Department of Energy, and like we did a discovery sprint and we interviewed like 40 people about this like energy transmission modeling software, right? Like I just think it's really fun to like learn about new spaces and new problems.
Because I feel like that to me, I don't know a ton of people, but I don't know a lot of engineers who are excited about talking to the people who use their thing. I don't know if that's just because I have bad friends or like, like that you get to actually talk to the people who used your thing. I don't often, at best, I look at a graph on a dashboard. That feels really exciting that you actually get to hear first or even sometimes watch firsthand somebody using your thing.
Yeah, I always jump in when I have a chance to do that, right? Like when I worked in video games, I'll be talking to the QA team, right? And like learning about things and, sitting down and like literally playing the game with people. And then when I worked on the Google Toolbar for Firefox, it had this like little support forum and I would just answer all the questions on the support forum. Like,
Nice.
because, I just felt like I knew the answers, right? And it was pretty easy to help people. And similar for Google Docs, like I would read the support forums and like we had, I guess they changed the name of like the people that lead user support a bunch of times, but I spent a lot of time with them, like making sure I understood the user issues and what was happening on Google Docs. And we would sometimes get to do like forums with teachers and stuff like that and hear like how they're using it in the classroom. And of course I would like jump at the chance to do that.
Right.
And then for search rate, like it's just so big, right? Like you can't spend a ton of time doing user interviews uses search, but like you would just learn things from looking at the data, which I thought was so interesting. Like there was this big push at one point for performance reasons. We wanted to make sure we're always turning on gzip. And so they found all the conditions in which we don't turn on gzip, and they flipped them. This is still before HTTPS everywhere. So they start to dig to the bottom, and they find at one point that all of the city is turning off gzip, and it appears to be like a proxy to censor the content. And just like seeing like stuff about like things that are happening in the world, I thought it was just really, really interesting. But also like it depends. Like I didn't get to talk much to search customers, right? Like people that search the web. But I did spend a lot of time talking to, like, basically I worked on the infrastructure for search front end, right? And so I spent a lot of time. I actually went at the beginning of my time on search. I went and interviewed like a few dozen people that worked on search features. And I just asked them like how, what's the biggest thing missing? What do you like? What do you think are problems? And then I like presented it to the team to try and help shape their focus. And that was super interesting.
I have to ask that, and you've started to allude to it with the data. How do you do that for the whole web? Especially now talking about core web vitals. And I know we wanted to talk about INP. Like you're coming up with metrics for everything, like for everything, everyone. Is that different? How are you looking at this data now and trying to figure, I need to talk to literally everyone. Is it like that, or is it different?
A whole lot of people, right? So there's quantitative analysis, but it veers into qualitative, right? So we look at the numbers, right? So for metrics, generally we have like a couple of different ideas, right? And then we try to figure out how could we compare the ideas. So at first we have like a lot of ideas, and we just take like some sort of test data set. So I'll give CLS as an example, right? We knew that we had some problems with the original CLS, how it was, it just recorded forever, right? Like it was a cumulative layout shift forever. And so if your page was open a really long time, that wasn't good. And so we wanted to make a change to the metric. And there was lots of different ideas. Should we just use the average layout shift value, or average layout shift over time? Should we have some sort of windowing strategy? If we had a windowing strategy, would we look at like the max window or an average window, or like a high percentile window, or like how long would the window be? And so we thought about all these things, and we came up with like, I think about 150 permutations of like different ideas. And then we had a bunch of partner feedback, right? So a bunch of different companies came and told Google like, hey, I don't think this CLS works on this use case. And then other times we had user feedback. Like, I'm really glad somebody cares when I'm scrolling and an ad pops in and shifts down all the content, right? So we had a bunch of feedback about like what people did and didn't think was fair about CLS. And we recorded videos of like, we just browse the web and have all of these user scenarios. And then we had volunteers rank them like pairwise, which was the best and worst. So we had like kind of like a rank set of user scenarios. And then while we're browsing the web and recording, we're taking a Chrome trace. We have all the individual layout shifts, and we calculated all 150 different permutations, and we saw like which ones came to the top. And we did that with a little bit of a qualitative eye, right? Like we didn't just basically machine learn the permutations on this very small data set. We said, oh, it looks like windowing in general comes better than average. This type of window, the session window, works best. There's a couple of different window lengths and a couple of different statistics on the window that appear to be best. So we took the top ones, strategy-wise, and floated to the top, and then we put them into Chrome. So on every page load, it's calculating like 4 or 5 different strategies of CLS and regular old CLS.
Right.
And then we basically just took like all the web pages and we ranked them top to bottom, like what strategy, what rank does this web page have for each strategy? And we looked at the ones that were the most different to start off with. And then we did like a qualitative analysis, right? Like, is CLS being fair to this page, right? Like, obviously something's weird when it says it's like a really good web page by one strategy and a really bad web page by another strategy. And so we tried to figure out like where those gaps were. And then we kind of wrote up like, okay, here's the differences between the strategies. And this is why we decided to go with this one. So it's a kind of a big back and forth, right? Where we're like, and we did qualitative analysis too, right? Like how much does each strategy correlate with time spent? That's obviously something we want to change numerically about our strategy. But we also have like a lot of qualitative data about like, what are we telling this web page author when we say either we're going to use a strategy that says your page is doing great or this other strategy that says your page is not good? there's a lot of like bouncing back and forth, right? Between like doing large scale analysis, it's starting small scale and very qualitative.
Zoom out.
And then
Zoom
like,
in.
zooming
Zoom
out
out.
to like the
Zoom
larger
in.
scale. I mean, when there's a bug with LCP or something like that, right? We do the same thing where we like try to collect as much data as we can about the specific situation and try to understand like how many pages does it affect? What would be the impact of making a change? And again, like we talk about running live experiments, like you can run a live experiments and understand that, right? Like how many pages are going to change if we do that. So we have like live experiments running and we can look at like what pages change scores and things like that. So part of it is a quantitative decision, right? Like just overall, if you look at like the percentage of pages passing in crux, like what was the shift?
Right.
And, like, was that what we intended? And then, like, let's go and look at some film strips of pages that changed. Do we agree on it? But as far as, like we talk to a lot of people, right? Like Google has partner teams that go out and talk to individual websites, and they give us a ton of, like, how do I say, summarized feedback. Like lots of people had problems with carousels and CLS. So we took a look there, for example. Then we have our developer relations team. And they get like a lot of more feedback on the ground, a lot more like they see the sentiment on Twitter, that type of stuff.
Yep.
The tooling teams get a ton of feedback, right? Where people are like, I don't like what Lighthouse said. And Lighthouse didn't really like dictate it. It was me.
Lighthouse
right?
lied to me. Right.
Yeah. So the Lighthouse team tells us like how people are feeling, right? When they make a new scoring change and stuff like that. We give talks. We have the feedback channel where people can rate feedback. Bugs come in. So we get like a lot of developer feedback through a lot of different channels. And we work really, really hard to listen, right? It's really interesting because like the number one thing we care about is like, what is the user experience? And that is always like how we make the decision. But at the same time, like you can't convince websites to change, right? If you don't listen to them and understand what their problems are and try to figure out what the right level is to come up with a solution. So, and I mean, it's a lot of back and forth, right? Like if we look at a web page and the author is frustrated with the score they have and they say, this score isn't fair. And then maybe my team says, like, you should have written your webpage differently. Like that's not actually our job, is to tell people like how to write their webpage, but we can talk to DevRel, right? And say, like, is that a fair assessment? And usually DevRel has a lot more nuance about, like, just in general, like, approaches to writing web pages and why somebody might have done something a certain way.
Man, fairness. We could talk a whole nother hour about this notion of fairness and how you deal with it. That's fascinating. I mean, we're coming close up on time. I know we want to talk about IMP, though. So tell me a bit more, like, what's that been like? We got this new big metric coming out.
Yeah, so I think everybody in the web performance community really recognizes kind of the biggest gap with Core Web Vitals right now is JavaScript, right? Like, people don't think that FID is a strong enough signal. And this was something that was extremely controversial, like, throughout the whole, like the initial launch of the program. We weren't sure, right, like if fib was going to be a strong enough signal. And I think the one thing that happened is people actually really did improve FID. It was about like 83% of sites passed on mobile, and now it's closer to 96. Yeah. But there still is obviously a lot of low-hanging fruit. Like there's still too much JavaScript running and it's slowing things down. And the big problem on our side is that Core Web Vitals are user experience metrics. We really want to make sure that when we're telling websites you should do something, it's because it's affecting users. So we don't want to just measure the amount of JavaScript that's running and tell people it's too much. Partly because we really care about the user experience and because we think that's, if you think about ways to measure fairly, like trying to get down to the user experience is one of the best ways to be fair. But also because like we're a web browser and we actually like run JavaScript for people and we want them to write JavaScript and be applications, right? Like we don't just want to say, don't run JavaScript, because if that was the case, we should just turn it off, right?
It almost feels like dealing with health and diet. Like not everybody needs to eat the same number of calories, right? Like, but we want you to be healthy. How do we do that? This is a tricky problem we need to figure out.
It is, right? But we really want to make sure that we're not that we're sending like a message that writing applications on the web is a good thing. Running things that are rich in JavaScript is a good thing. You just have to write performant applications. And so that's where interaction to next paint comes in. It measures the time for each user interaction on the page. We measure the time from when basically like the finger goes down for a key press until the next frame is painted, and or that when the finger comes up and the next frame is painted. If your page is fast, like there's actually like a gap between the down and up, and we don't penalize the page if the user's finger is slow. But basically, it's from the time the hardware like the mouse or the touch screen or the key sends a signal until the frame is presented to the user. And that's only like a little, it's not all of user interactions on the web, right? There's asynchronous work. It doesn't count that, but it's actually pretty stunning. Like if you think about it, that time that we're measuring, during that time, the browser is completely frozen. So if you had a button and when you tap the button, it turns gray. Like don't tap the button again. Like the button will not turn gray until after that next frame is presented. And what we're seeing in the wild is like massively large times. We know from user experience research dating back to 1968 that people expect some sort of visual feedback within 100 milliseconds, and they have for decades. And what we're seeing on the web is at least 80% of people, at least once a week, are seeing a full second of freeze, right? When they tap something or click something. 90% of user paid time on pages spent after the page load, and we're not measuring that, right? And it's a little bit of a crazy like a dire situation because like a lot of analytics providers actually aren't able to measure after onload at all. So your CLS after load, your response to user input, eventually if we get single page app transitions, like all of that like goes unmeasured in many analytics.
It would be like having cars and we're only measuring the startup time of the car, but not the entire drive to wherever you're going.
Yeah. And when I look at like the values of IMP, I can really see that like people aren't measuring this, right? Like that's really exciting on one hand because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. There's already optimizations happening on Chrome that can do stuff like cut off 10% at the 90th percentile. That's unheard of for more highly optimized areas of Chrome. So it's kind of fun that like we can, find something that really impacts the user and make it faster. And I think that's what I love everybody to be thinking about when we tell them like your IMP, it's probably not very good right now.
Right. I mean, you're like shining a light on something that we haven't even really thought of or at least if we've thought of it, we haven't been able to see.
Yeah. And so I'm personally like really excited to see like how the community will respond, right, to IMP, how they'll work on fixing things and improving things. I think one thing that I really like about Core Web Vitals is we try as best as we can not to dictate like how people should make their web pages. And I found a lot of surprises, like interesting and fun stuff that like I wouldn't have guessed people are doing to make web pages better. And I think that's really interesting and exciting. And I'm seeing just a lot already like in the framework world of ideas coming around IMP. So I can't wait to see.
Do you have any examples that have come up recently? I'm just so curious.
I mean, with IMP, I think like I personally need to learn a lot about hydration and how these different things work. But you can see there's just so much happening in that space right now. And trying to understand it all and see like, are we measuring it fully? What is the impact of the different things that people are doing on IMP? Things like that. I'm really excited to see where it goes. I think we're just in super early days.
Man, I'm excited too. It's exciting to know that the journey doesn't end here. We're just going to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, we will keep going, right? We'll land IMP, then we'll have better tooling for IMP. Yoav on my team is working on more asynchronous task tracking and understanding like the root cause of things that happen on a web page at like a much deeper level. So I think we have lots and lots and lots of stones to unturned still. So,
well, I could keep talking for hours. It's been so great. We've covered so much ground from game design to INP. It's been unreal. Annie, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time.
Of course.
I hope we get to do this again.
Yeah, definitely.
Until then, I'll catch you later.
All right. See ya.